You know what? I'm actually going to skip the intro altogether and just start recording.
Okay.
I'm just going to do the intro now. Ladies and gentlemen, and variations thereof, welcome to Selectives Lorecast, a casual and largely non-functional podcast. My name is Rotten Deadite, and I need to invest in some new hardware, apparently. With me today are...
I am Andrew, also known as the White Guar.
I am James, also known as Hermaeus.
And I am Felix, also known as Banu Hanamasaishi.
So it took me 45 minutes to cast, screw up audio, go offline, and then get things back up again. And in the meantime, it actually worked out for the best because now Felix is here from the start. So
Yeah.
today we're talking about the Dunmer Culture, and which, as I mentioned before, we've never discussed in any way, shape, or form in any previous podcast, mostly because there's almost no information about it in the Elder Scrolls universe. No major books have been written, no games have been dedicated entirely to it. So we're shooting from the hip largely. Today, I think what we're going to do is start from the beginning, historically from the beginning. Something that we mentioned before things went entirely sideways is that... oh, Matthew's here too. Hello. One of the things that we're going to that we were trying to get to discuss before everything went pear-shaped is that the Dunmer have a story of how their culture originated. In the respect that they used to be Altmer and now they're not. And what I find interesting about that is that we don't have a contradictory or even we don't have a contradictory version or even a variation of that story from the Altmer. Which, depending on your point of view in Elder Scrolls lore, either means that it simply ain't true or it's definitely true. But I mean, I think we can kind of all agree that nothing in the Elder Scrolls universe should be considered to be true at all. So I just think it's interesting that, to the best of my knowledge, we do not have an alternate version of the origin story of Dunmer Culture. Although Matthew does point out something that I did also want to mention, that it's also interesting to consider the fact that Dunmer Culture and Orsimer Culture both started at the same time, or were both inspired by the same event.
Yeah.
Or I should say Dunmer Culture. What I mean Chimer Culture. The golden elves that Dunmer used to be before people got greedy.
There is part of me that wants to say that might be purely down to Altmer or Oldmer culture more than anything else, because there's various bits about Auriel losing at Mora in various other sources, which you don't get from Altmer sources at all. So they're just not inclined to mention when stuff doesn't go their way.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
So.
Yeah, sort of an ethnic cleansing. I mean, a cleansing of past events from Altmer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons, sort of philosophically, metaphysically, I guess, that interests me about the parallel between Orsimer culture and Dunmer culture, other than the fact that they were both inspired by a similar event, by the same event. Although, thankfully, there is some contradictory stories about that event, is that both cultures eventually, I should mention, resulted in a shift in appearance. The Chimer described themselves as golden-skinned, which the Altmer are not often described as, but sometimes. So we can kind of maybe think that maybe the Chimer and the Altmer were very, very similar in appearance. But but it's very interesting to me anyway that these two offshoots of Altmer of the Altmer culture resulted in a physical transformation of the entire culture. The Dunmer are now, of course, a little bit shorter, actually quite a bit shorter than Altmer, and dark-skinned with red eyes. And anybody who makes their Dunmer have purple eyes in Elder Scrolls Online is not doing it right. And the Orsimer look like, little piggy pigs. That's true, Matthew. A lot of things have golden skin in the Elder Scrolls. And it is also worth pointing out that it is possible that when the Dunmer described the Chimer as having golden skin, they may have been sort of, embellishing a little bit.
Well, that's always the problem with Elder Scrolls lore, right? It's written
Exactly.
from the perspective of one group of people or a person with not necessarily the full story, and it's up to you to actually do research in a fictional video game
Hmm.
to try and figure these things out.
And hope
so
like hell
you
that
can
that
get
yeah.
numerous different theories, all of which sound plausible, right?
And you
Yeah.
got to
That's
hope
the
like hell that
problem.
writing has been provided to you, because sometimes not so much.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Although,
that's where the head cannons start to roll in,
Yep.
and
yeah,
then we get
I'm
canon wars.
I'm kind of interested with the idea of that, of why golden skin is an important thing or not, as the case may be. Because if we think back to something that we've talked about a fair bit, the idea of skin as ideology, then the Chimer became the Chimer when they stopped being like the Altmer in what they thought, which, if we go with that, should show a physical change as well.
Mhm.
So,
And the same thing with the
is that
Orsimer. They became Orsimer when they stopped buying the Altmer culture.
yeah?
And
Well,
what that golden skin sounds like to me is it sounds like because I mean who actually calls a race golden skinned except that race themselves, right? They're not having
A
no.
little egotistical, yeah.
Yeah, so they're saying no. We are right. We're righteous. We're the good people. Our
Hmm.
Yeah,
skin is gold because our ideology is gold. It is the
yeah.
best it can be.
Well, it's
well,
better
on
than
sort
that
of,
as.
sorry, go ahead, James.
Yep. No, I was going to say that I was just going to make a flippant comment, but it's either gold or piss. Take your point. Take your
Yeah.
Piss
Ew.
point.
um.
For me,
Uh.
it's always been a little bit different because, and perhaps this is just my own interpretation,
Mhm.
but when I see chimer, I think close to chimera, which
Right.
means like a changed one or something
Hmm.
like that. So
Yeah, I can't
if
imagine that's
anything,
a,
the
a
chimer was
coincidence.
probably like
Yeah.
a title they applied to themselves. And one of their original three good Daedra, their original tribunal, was Boethia, who is often associated with change. And to tie it back to what we're saying about the orcs, she is the one who I think like ate Trinimac,
Yep.
and
And pooped him
that
out.
is why the orcs changed, because
Hmm.
Trinimac was originally an Altmer or an Aldmer,
Thank
and
you.
by being eaten and defeated by Boethia,
Hmm.
he changed into the first orc, and those who followed Trinimac were then therefore Orsimer from thenceforth.
Well,
So all these associations of change with Boethia and the Chimer kind of just sort of fit for me.
yeah, and it's also worth remembering the origin of of Boethiah's war with Malakath or Trinimac, um, specifies the eating uh, symbol or metaphor, which may be literal or not, but it is worth noting out that in at least the 36 Lessons, another important piece of Dunmer culture, to eat something carries a lot more metaphysical weight than actually physically eating it. It's a like the in the 36 Lessons they say no words are true until eaten. The eating process, the consuming of something, taking it into your body, making it part of you, is part of the acceptance of truth, of the
Yep.
of the process of understanding truth. And and so you could take that to mean a lot of things when it comes to Boethia and Trinimac. You could say that Boethia consumed all of Trinimac and discovered the truth behind him, and therefore, spoke with his voice, if you recall, to Trinimac's followers and spoke the truth. Is one version of the story. So I think that, I mean, as much as I love the idea of Boethia consuming an Aedra or an Atata, I don't know. There's a lot of different. I enjoy the idea that there's a lot of different ways to interpret that in ways that
Yeah,
don't necessarily line up immediately with devouring something. It can be vor porn, but it doesn't have to be vor porn. Is what I'm trying to get at.
Well, in the Greg Keyes novels, Malakath himself says that that's far too literal and people are
Yeah.
taking it too literally.
Yeah.
So Malakath seems to think that he wasn't pooped out.
Mhm.
That,
And he was there, so he'd probably know.
yeah.
Or he doesn't want people to think that that's what's happening,
Yeah,
and he doesn't
or
want
he's
that
pushing an angle.
association, right? Like
That's what I think.
Mm.
Also, Happy Satan 999 asked an interesting question, which is, what are the connections between can be made between Dunmer culture and Chinese culture, given that both of them practice ancestral worship? I think we're the wrong 4 crackers to ask, or not
I
4
don't know.
crackers, not 4, but
I've
it-
actually explored the Dunmer as from a Chinese historical angle, but
right.
go ahead.
Yeah, we've talked about this recently, actually.
I do think that it's in. Oh, hold on. Okay, I do think that it's that something that important to Chinese culture, we should probably have somebody who's done a lot more research than I suspect we have. I'm not saying it has to be. I'm not saying only Chinese people can talk about Chinese culture, but I am saying that I would prefer somebody who went to school for it. I would.
I have taken a class.
Yeah. So have I, and that's one of the first things I learned is I don't know crap.
But sorry, just one last point before moving forward, just about eating is we also have an expression in English is when you make someone eat their words.
Right.
They're not literally eating their words, but we all know the sort of situation, the awkward context in which that happens, right? But we're not literally eating words or, eating the person's guilt, shame, anger, or whatever, right? So that's another way to help people who may be struggling with the concept of, no words are true until eaten. That could be another way of trying to look at it, because if you understand the context of that saying, then you should understand at least a certain way in which eating is meant in Elder Scrolls metaphysics.
And
on that, I'm willing to leave that point alone now. I just wanted to bring that last point out.
well, I think as far as Matthew's asking in chat what we think Boethiah actually communicated to the Chimer that she learned from Trinimac. It's reasonably certain, or I think it's it's a safe bet to say that it in some way involved explaining the creation of the world or of the purpose of Mundus from Lorcan's point of view.
Yeah.
Because Trinimac being the one who slayed Lorcan, was either chosen to do that because of Trinimac's, idiom as an Altmer god of war, or something, or because of some kind of knowledge that Trinimac had about Lorcan that, that the Altmer disagreed with or didn't have the same viewpoint. The knowledge that Boethiah, so it's very possible that because from an Itada standpoint, i.e., a god that does not want to be an Aedra, the creation of the world was a terrible thing. From this, and to prove that point, many of them fucked off after it was done. From the standpoint of a Daedra, the creation of the world is amazing, and that's obvious because they're still sticking around. So the idea of the Daedra having a more Lorcan sympathetic viewpoint is a safe bet. Most if not all of the Daedra are probably going to be very sympathetic to Lorcan's desire, to Lorcan's dream.
Youth and toys.
Yeah.
Well, it's also just it's all subgradients, right?
Right.
So at the end of the day, that's kind of how it all boils down into its core meat and potatoes there.
So as far as the specifics of what Boethiah taught the Chimer, it was probably something very similar to what the Heart of Lorcan taught Voron Dagoth, which is the cyclical nature of the Arbus and the sort of the idea or the dream of an escape.
We do have the phrase of the triangle truth being one of the things that they talked about, that Boethiah said using Trinimac's voice. But we also have the slightly more mundane stuff of, for whatever reason, they attribute a fair amount of their culture in general. That from everything from philosophy to architecture is the line that gets attributed to Boethiah and Boethiah's teachings.
Mhm.
I'm not sure that again we can take that entirely literally. I don't really see Boethiah sitting people down and saying this is how you build buildings at all.
Mhm.
But it's more the idea of the outlook than anything else. Because I think now I think about it, the phrase is responsible architecture or something.
Yeah.
It has some normative quality to it.
Mhm.
So again, it's the idea of the perspective of making things different and therefore better,
Right.
which I think is the core of Boethiah, what Boethiah did, because Boethiah led them away from Somerset.
Yeah, it's keep nothing in your house that is neither useful nor beautiful is the line from the lessons. And it's a very so one of this actually leads me into the next thing we were going to talk about in the big picture of Dunmer first Khmer culture, which is the parallels that it draws with Frank Herbert's Dune and the help native people on Dune.
Fremen.
Fremen, thank you.
Yep.
I wasn't anywhere near that word. Okay.
And you call yourself a nerd?
Right, right. Who? How dare I? So the Fremen have a very practical and direct culture, mostly due to, or according to Frank Herbert's books, his narrative, due to the incredibly harsh land that they live in. And whereas the Fremen are sort of on Dune by, I mean, they can't leave. They don't have the technology or the money to leave. And they certainly don't appear to be interested in leaving. They don't. The Khmer moved to Morrowind voluntarily, which is this is the first time you've heard about parallels with Dune, Matthew? Surely you need a kappa at the end of that. There's no way you missed yeah. There's a lot of parallels that there's a lot of things that Dune and Dunmer culture share, and by that I mean there's a lot of stuff from Dune that was adapted from Dune. When the Bethesda developers did the world building, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that both of the settings tell a story of a relatively primitive native people who live in an obscenely awful area of in a really really awful environment. Spice equals moon sugar. Hey, you said it, not me, Sobek. So
Moon sugar must flow.
yeah. Really, Matthew, I'd highly, highly, highly recommend reading at least the first Dune novel. Certainly read the Frank Herbert novels. You can skip the ones that were written by his son. Read the Wikipedia entries, but don't buy the books. Don't give those idiots money. So when and part of the shape of Fremen and Khmer culture is shaped by the environment they live in. It's extremely difficult to survive. It's almost impossible to do well, and it's so cruel and unforgiving that the culture, by necessity, you can say by evolution or whatever, develops habits and aspects that benefit them, that benefit people who live in that environment and can't leave. In Morrowind, they lived the Khmer lived there because that was where they were supposedly that's where Saint Veloth was directed to bring them. Whether that's true or not is hard to say. It's entirely. I'm willing to believe that that Boethiah encouraged the Velothi to move to Morrowind because she told them you need somewhere that's really shitty to live. You know, your ass has to get hard. You got to lift. You need gains. You need to lift.
Yeah.
So go somewhere where the weights are heavy.
Oh no, I got an interesting idea, and this is something I've spoken with Andrew about before. they went east because east is associated with change, and they knew that they needed to change from the Altmer in order to be the better people. Because
Yeah.
we've talked about before how like the north is frozen in time, the south is boiling in it, the east is the dawn of change and possibility, west is memory as it was in the
Progressive.
past. And so basically, when the Yokudans left to Tamriel, they sailed east, and by doing so, they changed to become technically a different people. We don't call them Yokudans; they're now Red Guards, right? And when the Dunmer moved east, they also changed, right? They changed from being Aldmer or Altmer, or whichever it is,
Mm-hmm.
and they're now the Chimer and also the Dunmer. And what better place to put a culture based on change and arguably like heresy, according to the Altmer, than the place that holds the heart of the greatest traitor
Right. Bingo.
to all existence.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that's why I think they moved there. Is the fact that it's shitty is just an unfortunate byproduct. It's you have to deal with the terrible monsters and the volcanic ash everywhere, but you have to be here if you want this thing.
Mm-hmm. Very good point.
That's my theory.
Yeah, if you want to be here near the thing that the heart of the thing that created everything, you have to live in this really shitty place. Very good point.
It's also on a base level, just the as far as you can get in mainland Tamriel to get as far away from the Altmer as possible.
That's also true.
Filthy
Go somewhere that they don't want to have anything to do with.
Yeah, it's all dirty and hard work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Thalmor are probably not marching into Morrowind.
No.
Well, we've conquered all the rest of the provinces. I guess Morrowind's the only one left. Yeah, but I mean, it's kind of half blown up. They can have it.
The only people who want Morrowind are the Argonians.
Yeah, Slovakine. It's actually. I think you're stepping close to something very interesting about that story, which is that the Promised Land was very close, but the Jews were not allowed to enter it for 40 years. In other words, an entire generation. So, and it was partially punishment, which is why they wandered around in the desert all that time, was because they couldn't go there. In this, we don't really have that part of the story in Saint Veloth's Exodus. So I don't think that's what that necessarily lines up properly. Although I always kind of was interested in seeing something in an Elder Scrolls game that talked, like a landmark or something like that talked about the people of Veloth, about the Velothi having traveled in this direction after they left, I assume, after they left the lands of the Altmer. I would assume that they, somebody could have set up, hey, Saint Veloth was here or something, but I don't know. Haven't seen anything like that in the game so far. So
yeah, because the text fell off the pilgrim. I'm just looking at that now because it was ticking some things off. It talks about a grand pilgrimage and saying that making all this huge effort to travel there, you'd kind of expect something to have lasted all that time.
Yeah.
But
yeah, and so when the Chimer arrive in Morrowind, they institute what we now call the Ashlander culture, a culture based around the worship of the Daedra, of building really interesting-looking shrines and living in yurts, and intentionally or not really developing into a major, world-defeating force. A lot of the struggle that the Chimer had against the Nords was because both cultures at the time were very tribal.
you mean Dwemer rather than Nords?
Well, no, the Nords too. When the Nords invaded, when the Nords invaded before the first invasion of the Nords before the ascension of Almsivy was a real goddamn heartbreak. It was a real knockout, drawn out war, and that's because I suspect the two sides were very militarily were very closely aligned. I doubt very seriously if any Nordic tribes who wanted to invade Morrowind were able to get all the other Nordic, not house, come on,
Or holds.
yeah, all the other holds. Thank you. Together, under one banner to march the entire, the entire possible army over. Instead, you only probably got the guys on the east. And
Although yeah.
yeah. Why did the Nords even want that shitty ass country? That's a really good question, dude. I wonder that often.
Art of Shore.
Yeah, I mean,
Yes,
Also,
sure.
actually, I would challenge the earlier notion to a certain extent that they didn't develop into a major culture or civilization, because we actually see in Morrowind a type of architecture unique from any house, which is actually known as Velothi architecture.
Strongholds.
The Shrine of the Dissident Priests. This was
right.
Velothi architecture. I think Holamayan was another one.
Yep.
That's Velothi architecture. Vivek Vos, not Telvos, but like the sort of part near to it that had these sort of strange looking houses.
No, you're right. Mm-hmm.
So
Like,
that's actually like Velothi architecture. So we know that there was this kind of stuff going on and happening at the same time as the Ashlanders.
And actually, the Ashlanders created the town that the Redguard are in.
Aldrin.
Aldrun. Thank you. Which is probably another good example of Velothi architecture.
Yeah, the actual the timeline there, I kind of find it difficult to fathom though, because if you go along with the Velothi architecture and things happened and flourished, if from before the ages of man, then you have what they call the precipitous decline of Velothi culture
Mm-hmm.
for no real reason. And then you have the Ashlanders, who are tribal and very, very clannish, still clinging to the ways of Veloth. They call themselves the Velothi.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got that idea of, were we looking at two different polarizing types of Velothi there? That is never, but it's never really articulated that way. The Ashlanders are the Ashlanders all the time, and then you've got some that were starting to settle, and then for some reason fell to bits for no apparent reason whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
That anyone can tell. It's not like the Nords invaded and crushed anything. It's just they stopped doing it.
Well, I suspect that it may have been the gradual influx, unintended or probably unintended influx of foreign culture. The problem with Ashlander culture, and Frank Herbert talks a little bit about this when he talks about Fremen culture, is that it doesn't hold up well to influence from external cultures.
Yeah.
It will. It is by necessity. It has to be xenophobic. It has to be racist, because it's very stiffly regimented, and it does not flex when pressured. It doesn't flex under gentle pressure, I should say. The nice thing about Velothi culture and the nice thing about Fremen culture is it's really great when you want to wage war against somebody. But if you slowly start to gently move in, the kinder parts of external cultures, the non-warlike, in other words, the not offensive like offensive, I mean like offensive like warlike aspects of other cultures, it doesn't support it very well. This is one of the ways that people like to talk about why South Korea, for example, North Korea is going through so many cultural changes right now. It's because they're having a great deal of difficulty keeping external culture out of North Korea. And the more South Korean culture and Western culture and just other Asian cultures start to infiltrate North Korea, the harder it gets to yeah. I understand, LV, that North Korea is kind of allowing that to happen to a certain degree, and it makes me wonder what's going on there. It's hard to call what their motivations are unless you're an expert, which I'm obviously not. Uh,
Yeah. There's also something that kind of chimed with me when looking at the Daedra worship in thinking about the evolution of their culture. That this kind of big warlike culture, it needs opposition. You've
mhm,
got if you think about how the Ashlanders and the Keimer came together with the Dwemer to form Resdayn. It was in opposition to the Nords. Until that point, they were just squabbling with each other. And there's that um, idea of constant conflict being the thing that's driving that,
mhm.
which works if you think about how the various Daedra that they worshipped function at the time. You've got Boethia, who's all about plots and the unlawful overthrow of authority. Mephala is lies, sex, and secret murder. And Azura is the one that is the big question mark there. I'm not really sure how she fits into that picture.
Yeah.
She's
But
she's actually
two of the three,
representative.
but
If I can,
yeah,
she's more representative of periods of change. So dawn and dusk being
yeah,
times of changing between day and night.
okay,
She also
yeah,
facilitated the change from the Chimer into the Dunmer.
yeah,
Um,
yep.
that's her main kind of thing.
Yeah, but the kind of if you translate the virtues of those Daedra and changes it another one there, that they don't work as societal virtues unless you are juxtaposing them with something, unless you are saying you have have something to lie to, have an authority to overthrow. You have to have something you need to sneak around to kill secretly. None of those work on their own, and that's very much in contrast to quite a few of the virtues that the tribunal push forward. The ideas, the full list of humility, mercy, pride, daring, generosity, courtesy, justice, and valor.
There
To
you go.
take the seven graces, they're very, very conducive to building a self-contained society. They're not in opposition to anything.
Mhm.
So again, that's the idea of Ashlanders and Fremen. They have to have an other to say that we are not
Right.
such like, which is the reason of
Mhm.
the Exodus as well. So it's there's that ambivalent relationship with foreigners, if you like. They are to be hated, but they are necessary.
Yeah, it's something that the what's her name, the Ashcan wise woman, the Ashlander wise woman in that you spend most of your time talking to,
Oh,
Sul.
Nabani Mesa.
Nobody
Yeah,
Mesa.
Nabati Mesa. Thank you. She actually mentions that the Ashlanders have gotten soft over the years. Um, and it's in fact it's one of the tribes that you deal with. Their whole problem is basically that they're not tight anymore. That they just don't have what they're not as badass as they used to be anymore, and it is sort of the way they paint them in Morrowind is very kind of like this is a dying culture. Um, so it's kind of inevitable, I think, that especially after the ascension of Almsivi, that you would have the creation of the three, or actually many great houses, or at least the houses, and then the three great houses.
Five.
Yeah, I'm sorry, five great houses, which we're now going to list off there. That'd be the Redoran, Hlalu, Telvanni, are the three easy ones from Morrowind. There's also, I think, Dress is one of the five,
Yep.
and the a most important one,
Indril.
Indoril.
Indoril. Thank you. And
Well, spiritually and culturally important in terms of actual power. They're the least powerful, at least after the Third Empire took over Morrowind.
and Sobek also pointed out that House Dagoth is I think the sixth house, but it's it's missing come the times of Morrowind. So yeah.
It's
Yeah.
a graced house
Hmm.
that's dead.
Yeah. Did we actually thinking about that? The idea of the sixth house as something, but the sixth house was deposed and wasn't replaced. But when House Hlalu was deposed in the Fourth Era, it was replaced with House Sadras.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Why not just have 4?
Politics, I think. I honestly
Yeah,
do.
it's the Redoran looking at the Hlaalu saying, "Hey, remember me, asshole?"
Yeah.
And also the representatives from the great houses also convene into, I think it's called the Great Council.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I think it's what it's called.
Grand
And
Council.
so Grand Council. And if they have only 4 great houses, they
You can
they can
deadlock.
50 split. Yeah.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, no casting vote. Fair enough.
they need that odd number to
But then
avoid
there's
a
House Dagoth, the 6th house, so there were originally 6 houses. So what the hell?
I'm not saying
There
that
was-
worked either.
There was House Dwemer as well.
That's true.
Yeah, something I pointed out in chat there. There's one source, I don't remember which book it is, but it mentions the Dwemer being a house of the Chimer.
Mhm.
And this is
Oh,
actually
I think it's
Yeah.
actually mentioned in the 36 lessons,
is it
but
in the 36
I
lessons?
think I might be. But if I
I feel
recall
like-
correctly, there's a couple of sentences in the 36 lessons that explain that vaguely hint that during Resdania, the Dwemer society was integrated into Dunmer society, and
Yeah,
I think I made the suggestion, or somebody made the suggestion, that it was possible that they were integrated in by giving them basically a house-like seat in the.
it's
Yeah.
there is another text. I think it's the War of the First Council that refers to them as House Dwemer.
It might
yeah,
be.
that's the one I was trying to look for.
Yeah, it's either that or the real Nerevar or something. It's a really obscure passing reference that everyone's kind of picked up on, and it's become part of the way of thinking about it for Resdania. But
I think largely that's been looked at as like, oh, this author doesn't know what he's talking about because we have, these other sources that claim that the Dwemer were a whole distinct race, which they may have been, just because they were a house of the Chimer. They may not have, because they fought against the other great houses. Dagoth and Dwemer were together along with the Nords and Orcs in the War of the First Council. And because the Dwemer did not go back on their word to Nerevar, they maybe did not change. And so the Dwemer are actually Chimer, maybe?
Yeah, I think that was the idea. That was a suggestion by somebody. Yeah, that they
Well,
they were, or
if we're,
yeah.
if we're operating off that assumption, then we also need to pay attention to the fact that the Dwemer, to a soul, all disappeared after the Battle of Red Mountain.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
true.
whether they were
So,
Chimera or not, it effectively ends there, because shortly thereafter, after the battle, like the
That's a good point.
Dwemer go, air quotations, missing, and then you have the Chimer who, when Azura sees Nerevar dead, she's like, "What the actual shit?" and changes them all into Dunmer as punishment. So like a lot of things happened after that battle around the heart, which changes
I wasn't thinking about the
holy crap.
chronology there.
and conspiracy theory, House Dagoth also disappeared after the battle. They were annihilated.
Based
I'm
on
reaching a bit there, but
yeah, I mean, because most people will agree on what happened to the Dwemer, being that hold on, I got my wife calling me. Give me a second.
yeah, but no,
Yeah,
but
being that the Dwemer vanished or became part of the of Numidium. Most people will agree with that, but are you maybe wondering why the Chimer weren't? If the Dwemer were Chimer, why weren't the Chimer wrapped up in it too? Because it's culture, not race.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that because I was kind of trying to back that up in thinking that House Dagoth was also annihilated. So, so where did they go? If you want to reach and have that particular tinfoil hat theory, you could say that House Dagoth disappeared with the Dwemer because they were doing the same thing as the Dwemer, therefore they were the Dwemer.
Sure, could do. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Continue. I thought you were finished. I'm sorry.
Dweeaboo? Oh my God, Slovakian! I'm fucking stealing that. Oh my God, that's the best.
It really isn't, but it's funny. But to go back to what Chris was saying earlier, to kind of help confirm it, is we also have the concept I think it's in the 36 lessons, or if not that, like somewhere else, which is wear your ideology as skin or as armor.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what better way for the Dwemer, with their ideology to become the skin of what was essentially their ideology, which kind of explains why it happened to them, because that's what they
Right.
believed in, for better or for worse. So, just
Yeah.
kind of try and help confirm what you were saying earlier about why it's about culture, not race, because in terms of the Elder Scrolls universe, ideology is a very powerful thing.
Yeah.
And House Dagoth was listed amongst the secular houses as well.
Yeah.
So
I'm not sure what I missed. But did we go over what probably happened to the Dwemer in regards to Numidium?
Yeah.
Slightly.
Yeah, a little bit, but I didn't want to touch on it too much because I figured you had a thought.
No.
So
Yeah. So basically, what I'm trying to get at is, we know what the Dwemer ideology is, and it's that this life sucks. We don't want to be here. We didn't ask to be here. Really, Rick Sanchezing it up. And, I always describe them. I always describe them as like hardcore nihilistic Buddhists. Is kind of how I think about it.
yeah.
They don't want to exist in any capacity. That's I'm glad you think that's so funny.
I'm sorry that one got under me. I'm sorry.
They're the emo kids listening to
Yeah.
Yeah,
Who was it? I think it was it Daria who said that Voron Dagoth was the guy who wore black and sat in the back of the sat in the back of the class and read too much H.P. Lovecraft.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm sure I've seen that.
Yeah.
Yeah, somebody wrote that.
But anyway,
no lies detected.
the idea. God damn it, motherfucker! I would take this down to my wife. Hold on.
Okay. Yeah. The
Anyway,
so we'll let him finish his thought when he comes back. But I like the. I frequently refer back to the transformation of the orcs and the Dunmer as a sort of an indicator that people need to think of the morphology of Tamrielic races as a reflection of culture and not breeding or anything, or certainly not evolution or anything similar. But
fantasy land.
Well, yeah, but what the other thing that's interesting to note is that actually, go ahead and finish your thought there, man. Because I'm about to run off on a whole tangent.
So the whole idea was that their ideology is we don't want to exist, and so when they activated Numidium, and what a lot of people don't know about the Dwemer, and this is a kind of a fact that gets overlooked often, is they had this low grade telepathic connection across their entire race called the calling. And so they could transmit information, ideas, that kind of thing, through this telepathic connection. And the idea is that when Numidium was activated at the War of the First Council, something happened causing all the Dwemer via this connection to mush into one entity and become an oversoul, which is to say that they gain divinity this way. You stack souls, that whole thing.
Soul stacking.
Additionally, they became the skin of Numidium. Skin being ideology. The Dwemer ideology is now Numidium's ideology, and Numidium deletes things outright. And so I kind of fall in line behind Michael Ziegler, Scourgicus or Moonsugar Leader, when he talks about how Numidium is a tragic figure, because the Dwemer, who are now one individual soul, are stuck deleting everything else that they are forced to persist. And so they are in their own personal hell. And so they cannot leave, but everything else, they watch it all go. And so when we talk about whether the disappearance of the Dwemer and the disappearance of House Dagoth are intimately related, I I don't know how much that holds up if we consider this idea, the skin of Numidium and everything, because
Mm.
the whole thing of House Dagoth when it returns in Test 3 Morrowind, is it seems to me that a lot of the people who join Sixth House or who are influenced by the little statues here.
Woohoo!
Yeah, I had that 3D printed. I like that. They it taps into some of in that latent Sixth House blood that exists, because I read a source somewhere. It said that once the Sixth House was disbanded, they
Mhm.
kind of melded into the other houses
Yeah.
Mhm.
were
Poison
assimilated.
Song.
Yeah, and so so everyone who becomes a sleeper or a dreamer was a Dunmer from another house, or maybe not from a house,
That's a really
whatever.
neat idea.
Who they have an ancestor who was part of House Dagoth,
Mm.
and so it seems to me that someone who was of House Dagoth, if they were absorbed and soul stacked along with the Dwemer, they wouldn't have progeny left behind, because those progeny would have been considered part
Yeah.
of the house
No,
itself.
I like your idea a lot more. in
So,
that works a lot better.
and that's part of what makes Dagoth Ur so dangerous to the Dunmeri, is because he can upset all of the other great houses
Mhm.
by basically gaining control of the of their constituency. Yeah, you've all got diluted Dagoth blood. You're all mine. You are part of my house, the house of me.
Yeah.
Yep,
Gaining
it's like Fight
dominion
Club.
over them.
Sure is getting Sharmat in here.
Yeah.
Sorry, that also feels very, very like. I'm sorry, I was getting chimes there from how they consider Molag Bal almost,
Hmm.
because that's explicitly something that he's called out as doing, contaminating the Dwemer bloodlines. But I don't know whether we've actually got any particular
The
association.
Molag Bal's
I
contaminating the
I think
Dwemer bloodlines?
Oh, not Dwemer, Dunmer
Dunmer,
bloodlines.
yeah, okay.
I think that may have something to do with his position as the Lord of Rape.
Mhm.
Yes, but it.
He's literally contaminating bloodlines
Yeah.
Yeah.
with his seed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love being absolutely disgusted by Molag Bal. I really enjoy it. I mean, I don't enjoy it, but I like that it happens. You know, I like that they write that character, that bad guy, well enough that he grosses me out. Absolutely, like
Yeah.
the whole creation of vampires is absolutely fucking awful. It's just awful, and I think it's great that they wrote it like that.
Yeah, notice
I-
how no one really wants to be, like, truly wants to be a powerful vampire in the Elder Scrolls universe, except the most messed up people, you know, like in the rest of our Western society, it's like, oh yeah, vampires, so cool, you know, bitten on the neck by Dracula. And Elder Scrolls is like, no, literally, like, the god of rape has to violate you
Yeah.
repeatedly,
Mm-hmm.
and then you become a vampire. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, maybe take a hard pass on that one.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I think that's a way to do it. I know for a fact that there are people. I think the vampires in Skyrim talk about converting people with bites.
Well,
Yeah.
you can, but you're not
Yeah.
as powerful a vampire as
Yeah,
the
you
vampire
you
lord,
catch the
right? Which is why
disease.
Harkon
Right.
was all like, "Look at me."
There it is. Yeah.
And I look at Harkon and I'm like, all I see is a rape victim. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Sobek.
Although,
Or yeah.
Let's
Well, Matthew. Yeah.
let's skip on Matt. Yeah.
We already I actually read that thread in on Reddit earlier this week, and it's what I find really interesting about that. I'm not I first off I agree, it absolutely means that too. But what I like about it is that it also works with the king is trapped. It, like, both of them work, you know, which I think is really cool. Both concepts work. The king of the land and the king is trapped both work at the same time. It's fantastic.
yeah. Yeah. Can I carry on the thoughts with Molag Bal for a second?
Mhm.
Because it was something that struck me. We were talking about about conflict and what that means in Dunmer society, or at least I was.
Mhm.
But you see the transformation of Dunmer society through the tribunal and the kind of the shift in becoming more settled, becoming a different type of society because they don't really have an active adversary anymore.
Mhm.
But then But you've also got the idea of how on earth does a society form. There was a thread, I can't remember where I saw it precisely or whether it's recent, but it's the idea of how on earth do you form a stable society with all the virtues that these Daedra espouse when you've got secret murder, revolution, and all the rest of it. It doesn't really work. But I think the key for that is yet another link to Dune, is the idea that the tribunal, or at least Vivek, makes himself the adversary of the Dunmer people.
Right.
You've got the threat of Bardao as a very, very explicit. If you don't do this, you are going to have the snot kicked out of you by this asteroid.
Yeah, the
They
Gardener of
love him
Eloth.
for
Yeah.
it. They love him for it.
Yeah, well, it's the same reason why the Dunmer latched onto that stuff for the same reason why the Dunmer worship, Mehrunes Dagon and Molag Bal. They they need to be led. Most people do. you know. It's an interesting and then also we don't want to play down the idea that the Dunmer worship Daedra out of fear. That it's worship, but it's what it is. In fact, is they're placating the Daedra. We come here and we offer souls to we offer acts of violence to Mehrunes Dagon so that Mehrunes Dagon won't come and destroy our villages and stuff. And we offer heinous acts of sexual assault to Molag Bal so that he won't come and fuck us to death in our sleep. That's all. It's all very it's all interrelated. That's how cultures and religions start around what are unapologetically evil gods. It's not out of it's rarely out of respect. It's usually out of fear.
Yeah.
So I mean, a lot of the reasons why the worshippers of Molag Bal and the other four corners of the House of Troubles are not outlawed and hunted down like dogs in Morrowind is because they're needed. It's one of the reasons why Morrowind is allowed to exist. They see like they in a way are doing people a service. It's just they're doing it a really unpleasant way.
Some of the things to touch on though in regards to Dunmer culture and the aspect of I guess spirituality and theology that would seem absolutely foreign to us. I mean, it's to briefly use a real world example. We have the Aztec gods, right? We demand blood sacrifice, and people think, "Oh, how horrific!" But there were also some people who actually volunteered to be human sacrifices because the general idea was, well, what better gift can you think of than like a life, a soul? Like, yeah, of course we gotta do this to the gods because like that's the best possible thing we can give them for food, for rain, for water, for success in battle. Like if you put that into the minds of people over a couple generations, they're going to come to accept it as, well, yeah, of course you need human sacrifice. How else are you going to make the sun rise and whatnot? Because that's the best thing you can give them. So you got to give them the best thing to get the best results, right? But to us, that seems like completely horrifying because our culture is completely different. Just as like that kind of note. And to bring it back to the Dunmer and how strange their religion is with the three good Daedra and the four corners of the House of Troubles that like challenge you, demons, spirits, however you want to consider it, is also a reflection of their landscape, which is a very harsh and difficult landscape in some areas, but also quite lush and beautiful and wonderful in others. And at the end of the day, the Dunmer who built the Velothi cities and settled down and established the great houses, that's still basically a form of tribalism. It's just bigger, more organized tribes as opposed to mobile camps. Like House Drez is still basically like a big version of the Ursulaku tribe. House Hlalu is just a big version of who's the other one there?
I can never remember them.
There's the Zainab, the Urbanimson.
The Zainab, yes.
Yeah.
Like, it's just kind of the same thing, just on a bigger scale.
I I
But
think you
where
might
the
be playing up to the Holy Trinity structure again.
that's possible, but
Yeah.
again, like the real schism, like you can talk about different lifestyles, but where the real cultural and theological, well, I guess not cultural, but the real theological schism with the Dunmer happened was after Red Mountain, where the tribunal had their story,
Hmm.
and yet Alondro Sewell, the shield bearer
Yeah.
of Nerevar, comes back to the Ashlanders and
Tells
says
a
something
very different
completely
one.
different.
Yeah.
That is when the schism really happens, and they're completely separate after that point, because that's when you start to see the worship around the tribunal, and the Ashlanders retreat even further into like, no, we got to be even more ascetic and crazy and harsh than we've ever been before, right?
Hmm.
That's really when that happens. But until that point, I feel like all of it was just kind of like you're all different tribes. But after the Battle of Red Mountain and Nerevar's death is when things really changed.
Yeah. You could. Yeah. I like
Mm.
that. It's and that's sort of the one of the questions that people have asked before is whether or not the Dunmer were better off in a tribal Ashlander culture or the house culture. And I don't honestly think it's possible to answer that question because we don't have a first-hand view of what Ashlander culture looked like in its prime.
True.
Which we, I guess, could possibly what would peak what is peak Ashlander? Is that before the Red Mountain or just after it,
I
or
I would imagine
Resdania?
before.
Yeah, pre-Resdania would be
Yeah,
my money.
like because like the War of the First Council was between the houses,
Yeah.
Yeah.
which implies that the houses are who have all the power. Um, and so if it's but before the establishment, or at least the I guess major yeah, I mean before all the power is solidified in the houses, then the tribes would have been um the main force there.
Hmm.
Although I'm wondering, a question that I thought of earlier, and I was waiting for an opportunity to ask it. Um, about the old Dunmary strongholds,
Hmm.
the square, almost like step pyramid looking things.
Yep, I
Sure.
love those.
Hmm.
I mean, do we know a whole lot about those? Is that where maybe the first Velothi staked their claims? I don't
Yeah.
I don't know what they
I
are.
I treat that as the stuff that gets referenced as the kind of high velocity culture in Before the Ages of Man.
Hmm.
There are one or two name drops there that are kind of interesting. They call out Baal Isra and a few other places as places where they are. I can't remember whether they map really onto any of the locations of the strongholds, but that's where I chart stronghold culture as being the kind of the high velocity culture, which then drops off. Um,
Because if you notice, the architecture is so different from anything else.
yeah,
Because if you see
Yeah.
like Baladas Demnavani's place in Nessus, you got the dome, and then there's kind of that tomb looking entrance.
Hmm.
Even the old Dunmary tombs kind of share that. It's almost it's really close to like temple um, architecture. But these
well,
strongholds, they're made of like bricks and stacked stone and that kind of thing, and it's so unusual to see that.
mm,
Hmm.
yeah, um, I can't. And hang on, oh no, I think there might be some, well, some contradictions there. Contradictions in Elder Scrolls, shock horror.
Yeah. Right.
Um, but Kalgroon, is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah,
The sixth house
Kogaroon, yeah.
stronghold.
Kogarun. Yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
that is a stronghold, which would imply that you've got strongholds happening around the time of the first council. If that's actually a place where House Dagoth was up until that point, then you've got the strongholds being there until the end of until the 700th year of the first era for some reason. But then you've got to think of a reason why the houses would abandon them later,
yeah. Well,
unless it's another
I'm trying to
unless
pull
it's
up a
another
map.
part of unless it's part of the shake-up that happens around the tribunal. There's the idea of people treating Vardenfell as holy ground because it's the place of birth of the tribunal, which then gets intentionally depopulated by Dunmer society and only treated as a place of pilgrimage. I, that's a fairly quick fix as far as I'm concerned, but it's the only way I can really think of to rationalize those differences.
Yeah.
I'm trying to pull up the map here, the hand drawn, just beautiful map that you get when you buy Morrowind.
Oh yeah.
Fresh.
Oh, I love that map.
Oh yeah.
I lost
fine.
mine.
I have a poster of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm.
I think
And
I
I'm
still
I'm
have
gonna go
mine
through-
somewhere.
I'm gonna go through and I'm gonna like circle in red all the strongholds and see if maybe there's a shape that.
Nah, I think people have tried that
No.
already. Yeah.
Tried.
No.
It'd be nice. Yeah, it would have been nice. Actually, I was
Yeah.
hoping for a while there that you could get the shrines of the four corners of the House of Troubles to line up into a thing, but it doesn't work either. Yeah.
No, it didn't work with the bug jars. It doesn't going to work with this.
Yeah.
Bug jars.
I miss the days back early Skyrim when everybody was like, "Bug jars, secret! Oh my god! Oh my god! Oh my god!" That was so cool. What does it mean? And then the source code comes out, and we're like, "Doesn't mean shit."
The ability to infer significance from a thing devoid of detail.
That's right. Yeah.
Haskell warns about that in the Shivering Isles.
I was
Really?
just thinking about that. Yeah.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
Haskell actually says something along the lines of humans will form a world of
Yeah.
conjecture based on a pebble of truth.
Yeah.
Someone responded to me on Reddit with it
Mm-hmm.
because, of course, they did. Let's see if I can find
Yeah.
it.
But yeah.
The only thing I
Right
could
here,
find
yeah.
about strongholds, and unfortunately it's not sourced, which is like, once again, this is why I don't read the Elder Scrolls Wiki and generally go with the Imperial Library or UESP.
Yep.
But it says the Dunmer originally built these fortresses to fend off Nord incursions in an area before the Great Houses coalesced. However, it's like there's a citation needed source, so there's no actual source for this. That's just someone thinking that's probably what it was.
Seems like a safe bet.
Been, and this is like my general theory. Again, there's no basis for this. I'm just trying to think of a rational reason. Is before the Nords came, the Dwemer and the Chimer were constantly at war with each other. A Dunmer stronghold is a great way to bring people to an area for safety from Dwemer armies or centurions or whatever, and to also keep a lookout for where are the Dwemer, and so that's why they're spread out all around and why there's various propylon indices so they can travel between them quickly to answer the various different Dwemer threats, because the Dwemer are mostly underground. They're the dwarves, right? So that for me is why they look so different, is because Dunmer strongholds are not so much an example of Velothi architecture and more Ashlanders who really had to get shit done architecture.
Right.
That's just my personal view, though. No one in chat or anything take this as like, oh, that's what it was. I'm just saying that's what I think it was.
Okay.
Todd Howard could come out tomorrow and say, no, that guy's an idiot. That's not what it is at all. And like, okay.
Oh, he's tired of doing that. He's not going to do it again.
Yeah, Todd, you heard it here first, folks. Todd Howard is tired of calling Felix an idiot.
Oh man, all the emails from Todd I've had to put in my I've had to archive. Jesus, every time. Excuse me, Mr. Nelson. At 14 minutes and 28 seconds, you inferred that blah blah blah, and as you can plainly see, take it easy, Todd.
Black out, you hear, you're finally awake.
Not even last night's storm.
Storm could wake you.
Get up. Get up, you filthy Inwa.
Now, what's your name? Yeah. So I missed that voice.
Other points to cover.
Yeah. I think let's see here. Uh,
I kind of wanted to pitch something on how I thought the Great House's clan structure kind of rolled together, and some bits and
Oh.
pieces about the ancestor worship.
Okay, shoot.
But yeah, but when you look at the kind of the Great Houses, I was trying to think. Well, they're based on tribes, right? And so how does that sort of thing function? It struck me as kind of almost marriage alliances, which kind of snowballed. And then you look at how the houses almost seem to kind of function as semi-autonomous economic units. They manage
Yeah.
all their own areas. They manage their own trade. They have their own tradesmen. They're all their own craftsmen with their own focuses, sure. But it just strikes me that they have their own particular areas that they own everything. They do everything. If you are in Indoril land, you do everything as the Indorils do. If you're in Telvanni land, you do everything according to Telvanni law. That it almost feels like there should be different law for different houses, and there's also mention of minor houses as well, which kind of attach themselves to these other houses. I've been listening to an awful lot of stuff about the history of Rome recently,
Hmm.
and I was thinking about that's kind of thinking about how the client patron relationship there worked. That clients would say, well, they will act politically for their patron, and in return, the patron will give them cash. It was literally cash for votes in how it originally started, and I was thinking that you're potentially looking at a similar structure there, that a great house is a collection of um, is a collection of families who have said, right, we're going to set things this way. You do things for us. We will give you recognition. We'll give you protection. It's not quite feudalism. It feels a little weird in that sense, because it's based on familial structure and ties of marriage and so on, rather than strictly oaths. But that struck me as how these houses kind of snowballed, and how if you play your cards right, marry the right people, and do the right things to the right local councils, if I remember rightly, because that's how House Indoril fell. They lost control of all the local councils because everyone topped themselves after the armistice. That if you kind of buy into that kind of patron-client relationship, that's how the great houses function. There's very little out there, and I'd love to know more, and I'd almost love to be wrong, because then we'd at least have some information.
It'd be interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually, speaking on some information, I'm reading the chat in the Twitch chat right now. There's a few things. Johnny Anonymous said Nervar united the houses and the clans, so it would have to be even before that. I'm assuming he's referring to the Dunmer strongholds, which is why I'm saying yes, it sort of predates, like, not necessarily the Velothi architecture, but before the Great Houses, and that's why the architecture is so different, because it was when the Ashlanders were still potentially at peak Ashlander civilization, and why they needed the strongholds, which is why it's so unique and different. He also said House Dagoth architecture is the same as the strongholds as well, which is not necessarily true per se, at least not that we know of, because House Dagoth occupied some of the strongholds, particularly Kogorun, which itself was lost. Just over the generations, it was lost to history.
Kogorun was the one with
from
the
House Dagoth, you can actually you can bypass the ghost fence.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Kogorun has the underground tunnel. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why Kogorun is the only one that looks kind of old and lost and dusty, because it is A, in a very isolated location, and B, no one really remembers what happened to it in history, whereas the others were at least known of and still have the propylon chambers that you can teleport between. And Sobek Ra Infidel found
That's
the
me.
actual quote from Haskell.
That's me.
Yeah.
That's me.
So that was like, hey, props to Sobek Ra, because that's great.
Slovakine.
Why? Oh, sorry. And Happy Satan says, speaking of why were the strongholds abandoned? The strongholds were implied to have been abandoned after the great houses coalesced and worship was directed towards the tribunal, because they were sort of the all-powerful gods, and so there was no more need for that, and the Dunmer were also gone, so it was like, well, don't really need these anymore. So just whatever kind of thing. The necessity for them ceased after the Dunmer disappeared and the tribunal ascended in power. To answer that question.
Yeah, like old military bases or old
Yeah,
military
like there's a
fortifications.
whole bunch of old star forts in Canada, but
Yeah.
no one really uses them anymore because they're not needed.
So Slovakian's asking how Dunmer names work. I think actually James touched on that a little bit. They're very similar to the house system, certainly House Sewell and House Lalu and so on. You see a lot of that. It's a little inconsistent. Not everybody has the last name of the house they're a member to, in the game at least. And I think that
almost seems like a nobility kind of thing.
that's what I was going to say. I think it might be like whether or not you actually use that name might. I know that you don't that if you take the name of the house, that doesn't mean that you were a descendant of the founders or somebody who was a member of like the family, you know. But it was definitely so it was definitely an honorific kind of thing. But I also think that this works very similarly to the way that the Ashlander tribes work, where you get, people's last name is possibly denotes a familial relationship, but might not necessarily. It might just be a membership, there's also a little bit of inconsistency about whether or not the family name comes before the personal name or after it. I think that sometimes some characters will get their names flipped accidentally, I suspect. But I'm reasonably certain that the system is supposed to be that your your house name or your last name, that your house name is your last name, and I'm saying that because of like Alandro Sewell or Voren Dagoth. But then we have like, I think at one point or another somebody listed out Nerevar's name as being Indoril Nerevar.
Yep.
But actually, I think there was a developer said he had 4 names, 4 words in his name, I think, and one of them was a reference
didn't
to.
Daria post something about that in?
Yeah, was it Dren?
It might have been.
I don't remember. Sergio Indral Nerevar Mora. There you go. Thank you very much. There you go. Well done. So Sergio, I think, is an honorific.
Yes.
Yeah, it is.
Indral Nerevar Mora means he came from House Mora.
House Mora originally.
Which I believe was a bunch of guards, I think. They were caravan guards.
That's the story you get from 36 Lessons.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. That's right.
Yeah. But bear in mind, I think Berenzire also comes from House Mora.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
I think.
We need Nerevar's offspring.
Yeah.
Maybe he had a family. I don't know.
Families are for chumps. Be a god. Be alone.
Yeah.
Well, if you did have a family, they're also by Amalexia, so
the word Mora shows up in way too much in too many unrelated places. It's got a lot of meaning to it.
Or it's generic meaning. It's wood.
Well, yeah, but a forest. I think.
Which brings us to another uniquely Dunmer thing: the Morag Tong.
Oh, okay. So state-sanctioned murder.
Yes and no.
Matthew, the relationship is a word. The name that's it. Hermaeus Mora. Herma Mora is the old man of the forest, and Morag Tong are the gardeners of the forest.
No, the Foresters Guild.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, the Foresters Guild. Tong is guild.
Foresters Guild. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. They were originally. I think there was something about how they were originally a guild about that were gardeners. I think. I don't remember where I'm remembering that from. That may have been something I made up. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
It works very well. You trim out the errant blade of grass that sticks out.
Yeah, that's just as Vivek calls herself the gardener of Veloth. It's the same thing. Yeah.
And again, let's think about what the Morag also represent, especially if you do the quest line in Morrowind.
Mhm.
You find out that it's all about the web spinner, Mephala, who's one of
Yep.
the 3 core Daedra who were, the anticipations, right?
True. Mhm.
And so in that sense, it provides that additional cultural context, so long as you decide to look for it and understand it. It gives you that additional context of, oh, well, this is actually necessary to the functioning and maintenance of this society, because even a gardener must trim away at the rose bush or the hedges in order for the garden to be at its most effective and beautiful. You must remove the weeds. You need to transplant plants to different areas. Like there's all this different thing that goes involved in gardening, or in this case foresting, selecting certain trees
Mhm.
that need to be felled for the benefit of
Mhm.
the society that's going to use it.
Yeah,
So
Matthew
in that
Schroeder
sense,
just posted
the
something
Morag
much like
Tong
that
is
in
not
chat.
simply
Yeah.
just state-sanctioned murder. It's more about, through the hands of a god,
Mhm.
like an actual literal god, helping to shape the culture so the culture can be at its best, at least according to the definitions of what constitutes best according
Yeah.
to this culture.
But
Yeah,
in
when you cut
practice,
State-sanctioned murder, but that's definitely a part of it.
yeah. In
Yeah,
practice,
they're meant to
state-sanctioned murder. Yeah.
yeah, they're meant to cut. They're meant to cut society into the right shape, but
Yeah.
they don't.
Um, and it's also, I mean, once again, something that I think we touched on in the Nordic cast is the threat of Hermaeus Mora to the Nords. Is still something that I don't think was. I would have liked it to have been explored in Skyrim, and they didn't really get to it.
I mean,
Yeah.
it was
I feel like a
explored
lot
a
of stuff was
little
cut from
bit.
Skyrim, unfortunately.
Yeah.
In the Solstheim, the Dragonborn expansion. I mean,
Yeah.
they touched on it. I mean, Hermaeus
Little
Mora
bit. Yeah.
being the aggregate and the Charmet being the
Mm-hmm.
pawn of the aggregate, maybe.
Yeah, but it
Um,
still they didn't really talk a whole lot about the relationship, the historical relationship
Yeah.
between Hermaeus Mora and the Nords, which the fact that like you remember that one little nugget we got with the origin story of the Nord creation myth, um, which sets up Hermaeus Mora as the ultimate evil in the world. It's hard to ignore.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
running out of stuff.
we could
No,
talk.
we're not. I have like a list here. We haven't talked about Dunmer music. We haven't talked about Dunmer food and why they eat the things they do. The
Why they
use
eat
of their
bugs?
animals and like the
There's-
various relations therein.
Yeah.
The complicated relationship between slavery and
Oh.
Dunmer.
Ooh.
Felix, were you involved in that conversation in the Dream Sleeve about the food that the Dunmer eat?
Yeah, and we decided it was largely inspired by like Southeast Asian cuisine, probably.
Yeah. A lot of spicy food.
Mhm.
A lot of,
Actual eating of various bugs,
yeah, like
insects, arachnids.
yeah, tandoori oven kind of stuff.
Yeah, I
Do we
remember.
actually see any ovens in any of the games? Do we actually
Um,
see Morrowind ovens?
I mean, I could go explore ESO and like specifically look for them. I mean, I know in taverns there's like cooking fires and that kind of
Yeah,
thing.
yeah. You know, there's a house mesh in Morrowind that has a central.
Yeah. It does. It
Oh,
does.
circular-
yeah,
look
like the
tandoori,
thing that
doesn't
looks
it?
like a wood burner.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
It
Yeah.
does. It looks like a tandoori to me.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Yeah.
it's not a tandoori; it's a tandoor. That's the proper name of the.
Okay.
Yeah.
My mistake.
Well,
It was actually part of the bug that they made the house out of. I think.
Possibly. I mean,
Okay.
hey,
I think.
use it, right?
Even
Yeah.
better.
Get that nice bug gut.
Whatever happened to all those bugs?
They died.
The whole place blew up. Yeah.
Well, no, I
Yeah.
mean, because like when we're in Morrowind, second era, third era, anytime before the Red Year, now we have all these houses that are made out of the shells of giant bugs.
Oh, and where do they all
Where-
go?
Where are the bugs?
Housing
There
boom,
are
dude.
no-
The
they're just
last
can I say?
housing boom you'll ever get.
I mean,
Yeah, what
I'm
can I say?
wondering if they might actually be like aquatic insects.
Oh, there's a thought.
So like snail kind of stuff, and they're huge, and so they lure them up on land or something and do it that way. I don't know. I kind of spitballing a little bit. I do like that though.
No, it would make sense. Yeah. You were talking about about slavery, Felix. That was kind of the foremost of the ancient traditions that got preserved in the armistice, and one of the big reasons for the incorporation into it by treaty rather than by conquest. But I don't know whether we've got any explanations to how they really think about slavery, because just to use another real world comparison, the slaves that got taken from Africa were treated very differently to how slaves are treated in the Roman Empire, for example. And
True.
I,
It's different. That was chattel slavery in the case of West African.
mhm. Yeah, but the status of slaves is the thing. I mean, you get the Talvani who think of slaves as just objects to muck around with, but they're pretty much the only culture in Tamriel that really have a significant thought about slaves. There's no since I was going to say since the Elysian Rebellion. I don't think we've got any other documented slavery in Tamriel, have we? Um, So I'm just wondering what the reference point is for why slavery persisted for so long in Morrowind, even up to the point of the armistice, because you've got whole eras going by where it's totally devoid from other places in Tamriel. Um, I My own thought on it is that it's potentially something to do with, again, this notion of the Dunmer inflicting violence and having that imposition of violence on things. If you look at how that I say they were formed through conflict in various ways, or their society is defined by conflict until the tribunal, and then you've got them still taking it out on the slaves, and to an extent taking it out on their ancestors when they're saying, well, you die, you will still serve your house, you will still carry on no matter what, and you will comply even if you don't want to. There's a system for press ganging the spirits that don't want to serve their houses into another way. Is it just the Dunmer have to have someone to dominate? That's part of that's part of their culture and part of their superiority complex. I don't know.
Maybe. Yeah.
I don't know.
Well,
Sorry, I just wound up rambling there. I possibly had a question, but it kind of got lost. And thank you, Johnny, for pointing out that Nords used Moorish slaves to build their cities.
mhm.
And we also have stuff from Matthew saying that the Thalmor has slaves in Somerset. Because I was thinking it's kind of weird that there's hardly anywhere else in Tamriel that really mentions slavery once the Elysian Rebellion is over.
Oh, once I was about to say, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and it sort of makes me wonder how, has anybody played the Khajiit zones in ESO yet?
Yes, I've played every zone.
Um, my only it's not a dramatic criticism, but my only huge criticism, it's not a huge criticism. My only mild criticism of ESO is that it doesn't really its depiction of cultures is relatively complementary to every culture. They don't spend a whole lot of time dwelling on negative they don't spend a whole lot of time developing new negatives for cultures.
I mean, a lot of that I think is dependent upon your idea of what is negative in your interpretations. Because I know with like the Somerset expansion, there are a lot of things that are really cool that kind of harken to like they have praxis, which is basically the equivalent of Japanese ikigai.
Yeah.
Um, and but you also see how they treat people who are different.
Yeah.
And
Well, That was
not
kind of already an
popularized at all.
established thing, though, for the Altmer.
Yeah,
And they deal with the slavery issue in Morrowind very heavily, too, house dress and such. But again, that was already established.
Yeah, well,
I mean,
there's one quest you can do. There's this guy who's got this, like his face is all messed up, and he cannot partake in Altmeri society
yeah.
because of his deformity.
Mhm.
I don't know how much that, specifically that almost this, I think of the beginning of 300 where, um, all misshapen babies are discarded.
Discarded, yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, like I don't know how much that was a thing in prior lore.
I know that it got brought up a lot well, not a lot, but it got brought up every once in a while. But it was also almost every time that it was brought up, there was a counter voice saying, "This is politics."
Yeah.
And then I think ESO's official line on it was that there was selective breeding, like voluntarily selective breeding, I think.
Yeah, which I mean, that's effectively eugenics.
Yeah, but it was to a degree organized, if I recall correctly. Like they were saying, like, we would encourage the following people to mate. Or these are the things that, like, if you're of this certain disposition and that, judging from your genetic lineage and such, we would encourage you to find people who had the following traits. So it wasn't like state mandated, eugenics, but it was, yeah, it was relatively callous. One thinks, but anyway, snow whales, yeah. Jesus, I'm sorry. Hold on, dogs again.
What?
He's got dog problems.
Dog issues.
Yeah.
We need more cocaine snow whales. That's what we need.
What?
I
More
included
netch.
I included them in Slota, kind of.
Yeah. More netch.
Except they're dead, and instead of cocaine, it's a burning, acidic, flaky shit.
Sounds pleasant.
Yeah.
Nice one,
Oh yeah.
Derek.
Very.
There's a piece for Beyond Skyrim elsewhere that I've been writing that I don't know if it'll actually get put in, but
I need to get back into
there's a
that.
bit where a Slode shows up in a floating, this almost like a zeppelin, but it's a dead whale, and it's bobbing along over the water, and it leaves flakes of just cancerous, acidic, disgusting shit.
Yeah.
And like one of the he shows up in Senchal. One of the Khajiit tries to catch a flake and it burns his skin. He's like, "Ow."
Yep.
Is there anything else we wanted to cover Dunmer wise?
Felix, anything else on your list?
I think we're drifting.
Well, I just brought up, music, food. We touched a bit on food, about how we talked in a different group about how it was probably heavily inspired by like South Asian and particularly Southeast Asian cuisine, especially revolving around bugs and things like that.
Yeah.
And for me, the Dunmer lute looks a lot more like an Indian sitar or veena, as opposed to a like regular lute. Like if you look up a lute online and then you look at a Dunmer lute,
okay.
and then if you Google, Indian veena or Indian sitar, it's like, okay, I think I know where art design took their inspiration from. It wasn't an actual lute.
Yeah.
Which then leads me to question, well, what did Dunmer music sound like? We sort of get a few hints and clues here and there in the game with some of the soundtrack, but other than that, we don't really know. It's never completely listed.
Let's see. Yeah, I think we've petered out at the end of another Selectives Lorecast, as we often do.
Yeah.
We can talk about dirty, filthy inwas.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm always down for discussing that.
I wanted to finish. Well, my last thought was Red Year, and
Oh,
potentially how that what that meant, and it's basically, if we're carrying on the Dune references which we started this cast with,
sure.
it's Vivek's golden path. It's the idea of you
Right.
have oppressed someone for thousands of years, and then you hit them with a cataclysm which scatters them throughout. In Dune's case, it's throughout the known galaxy, or are we talking universe? I can't
I think it's
remember.
the known galaxy. Yeah.
Oh, it's galaxy. Okay, but in this case, it's scattering the Dunmer people throughout Tamriel. It's and then you got the final line of in the end, my reign will be looked at as an act of the highest love.
Right.
I don't think the Dunmer are quite there yet.
Yeah.
In terms of how they're processing that.
Well, but
really?
do not misconstrue love for affection. This is Vivek's love. And
Okay.
in the end, Z meant amaranth. So
Yeah, okay, yeah, we can get into I suppose it did produce Jubal, so
right.
yeah, it was what was necessary to produce Jubal, but yeah, it's in now, and they've kind of for me that the Red Year has kind of gone back to the origin to the almost to the origins of the Dunmer, because they are now a nomadic people.
Right.
They're scattered throughout Tamriel. They don't really have much of a home anymore. It's in theory steadily being rebuilt, but the impression we get from Dragonborn, when we go to Solstheim, is that it doesn't really seem to be that well rebuilt.
Yeah.
I mean, the accounts we have are like there was reconstruction efforts going on Vardenfell a few months afterwards, and then 200 years later, people are saying, "All right, it's a dump," which feels like there's something else that's happened in the interim, almost, to kind of hold everything up. Well, there's the Argonian invasion as well, and that's probably the more enduring problem rather than the Red Year.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I don't. I mean, I'm very interested to see where Bethesda's going to take Dunmer next. For the new Elder Scrolls game. I don't know how many we're going to get all the way over in Hammerfell, but I'm very interested to see what they do, where they take the Dunmer next. If they're just going to continue to be sort of, migrant people wandering around without a home, or are they going to establish a new place? Are they just going to go invade Argonia?
Oh boy.
Which is a thing to do. It's just not a good idea. And or what exactly? I would not at all be surprised to learn that the Dunmer actually try to go back to Morrowind. I would not be. There's something about that culture that makes me think that people get nostalgic really hard.
Get nostalgic about Morrowind? That never happens.
Yeah, but I mean, like y'all remember back in the day, things were nice. We had a volcano. It didn't erupt too often. Sure, the dust storms were pretty bad, but if I recall correctly, it was nice owning land and people. So I'm just saying, I suspect
great again.
maybe, yeah, exactly. Maybe it's because of where I grew up, but I'm just saying I suspect there might be parallels. Okay. Anywho, thanks for tuning in. I don't know what we're doing next show. I don't know. We'll figure it out.
Well,
But one passing thing is, like, as the outro to this lovely podcast we've had talking about, everything from racism and food to the metaphysical reasons how and why the Dunmer became the Dunmer.
Yeah.
There is a link about imagining Dunmer music to sound like it. It is choice.
Okay. Yeah.
So everyone, once we sign off, just listen to that and just think about the Dunmer and how terrible and racist they are.
Yeah. Okay. So long, folks.
Fantastic. Bye.
Bye, everybody.